Distinguished members of the bench and bar, and welcome attendees. My name is Marty Schulman. My program co-chair, Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Deborah Kaplan, and I welcome you to this afternoon's Holocaust Remembrance program, sponsored by the Jewish Lawyers Guild and the Gender Fairness Committee of the Civil Branch of the Supreme Court, New York County. It has been a difficult few years, so I am truly grateful that our annual program once again is being held in our courthouse's majestic rotunda. We are also live streaming this meaningful commemoration to reach a broader audience. I must share with you quoted and paraphrased portions of a recent Associated Press article which reported that 100 Holocaust survivors from across the world were united to deliver a video message on the dangers of unchecked hate and the importance of remembrance at a time of rising global anti-Semitism. This 100-word project video was released on Yom HaShoah, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day 2 weeks ago. These survivors urged the world to stand with them and remember the Nazi genocide and avoid repeating the horrors of the past. Gideon Taylor, president of the renowned Claims Conference, which released this video, sadly remarked, "The world is full of strife, from the pandemic to the crisis happening in Ukraine. On Remembrance Days, like Yom HaShoah, it is so important to stop and reflect." And this was the 100-word project message of these survivors. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. We all survived the Holocaust. We are here to give voice to the 6 million Jews who were murdered. We are a reminder that unchecked hatred can lead to actions to genocide. Just over 75 years ago, 1/3 of the world's Jews were systematically murdered. Among them, over 1.5 million children were killed in the name of indifference, intolerance, hate. Hatred for what was feared, hatred for what was different. We must remember the past, or it will become our future. On Holocaust Remembrance Day, we ask the world to stand with us and remember. This afternoon, we stand with all survivors and will remember with our candle lighting program and publicly read the stories of 6 Holocaust survivors. After each story is read, the survivor or the survivor's family members will light a candle to honor the memory of loved ones. And these 6 candles will also honor the memory of the 6 million souls who perished. We are honored and privileged to have the Honorable Deborah Kaplan, Deputy Chief Administrative Judge of the New York City Courts, our program's co-chair and co-chair of the Gender Fairness Committee, who will read 3 of the stories and co-officiate the candle lighting ceremony. I've said this every year, and I mean every word of this. Justice Kaplan, a good friend, is a compassionate and extraordinary human being, an extraordinary administrator, and an extraordinary justice. My friends, Justice Kaplan.
Good evening. Thank you, Judge Schulman, for your kind remarks. I want to welcome you to the Holocaust Remembrance Program, and I want to thank you all for being here, whether you're here with us in person or here virtually. First, I want to thank the Jewish Lawyers Guild, who co-sponsors this event every year. and we are deeply appreciative of the Guild's invaluable participation and commitment to this program. I want to acknowledge and thank our wonderful new Administrative Judge, Adam Silvera, in this court, Chief Clerk Dennis Rio, Michelle Gonsiecki, and her wonderful staff who work so hard every year to make sure that this event is a success in our court. I also want to thank the other members of the Gender Fairness Committee, which co-sponsors this event. Committee members work tirelessly on this program and others throughout the year. In particular, we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to my colleague and friend, the Most Honorable Martin Schulman. I know that Judge Schulman is exceedingly busy at the Appellate Division, yet he continues year after year to dedicate himself to ensuring that this program is memorable and meaningful. And thank you also to the Honorable Lisa Sokoloff for her exceptional efforts in identifying candlelighters and reviewing each lighter's story. I want to acknowledge again the wonderful SAR High School Choir, which will offer, as they have before, musical selections. And this talented group of singers is a most welcome addition to our program each year. So we're very grateful to have you back this year in person. Our keynote speaker will come to us remotely, but her presence will be palpable nonetheless. Lily Ebert's story of surviving the death camp at Auschwitz is heroic, chilling, and deeply moving. And hers is an extraordinary tale of indomitable spirit and immense courage. Now, we know that more than 7 decades have passed since the persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. Others, too, suffered dreadfully, were dehumanized and murdered between 1933 and 1945, including people with mental disabilities, Poles, Romani people, LGBTQ individuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, political dissidents, and others. The number of survivors and first-hand witnesses is gradually diminishing. So it is even more incumbent upon us to keep their memories alive and to remember those who perished in the Holocaust. That is why we come together each year and we give voice here to the murdered millions. We share the experiences of those who survived Nazi atrocities, and we will do all that we can to preserve the Holocaust memory. It's especially important now as there were 2,717 reported anti-Semitic incidents in 2021 here in the United States. Those are just the reported ones. Shockingly, that is a 34% rise from the year before and a record high since incidents began being tracked some 40 years ago. And I tell you this because these are truly disturbing statistics. So, it is our moral obligation to call out hate when we see it and when we hear it. Anti-Semitism or any other bias, be it racial, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, age, or disability, cannot be ignored. And frankly, to not speak up is unconscionable. Famous quote from Elie Wiesel says, quote, "I swore to never be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. Let us all here today make that same vow. It is now my great honor and privilege to share with you the compelling, the haunting, the unforgettable stories of our first 3 candlelighters' families. The miraculous survival of Raoul Artel Mittelmark. Raoul Artel Mittelmark is one of the youngest survivors of the Holocaust. He was born in April 1943 in hiding in a Nazi slave labor camp, Beshad Transnistria, part of present-day Ukraine. His parents, grandparents, and all of the Jewish residents of Bessarabia were deported by Nazi authorities in 1942. They were forced to walk over 250 kilometers with no food or water and to endure constant beating by Nazi and Romanian soldiers. His grandfather, Israel Gitzis, unable to complete the death march, was shot and left on the side of the road where there is no marker to commemorate his passing, as the actual site remains unknown. Prior to deportation, Israel was a pharmacist and the respected mayor of Khoughton in Bessarabia. His grandmother, Sonia Gitzis, was deported to the Mogilev camp, also in the same region, and she died of typhus and starvation. Raoul's mother, Rosa Gitzis Middlemark, was born in Khoughton in the year 1919 and trained as a classical pianist. His father, Herman Middlemark, was born in 1910 in what is now Ukraine. While pregnant in the camp, Rosa endured typhus, typhoid, extreme cold, starvation, and slave labor. She gave birth to Raoul in hiding and experienced a very difficult breech delivery, but miraculously delivered a healthy baby boy. Raoul was hidden for close to a year while suffering from typhus, often with his head covered to muffle his cries. His mother lived in constant fear that he would be discovered by camp authorities, who regularly searched the camp for hidden children whom they immediately murdered. In the camp, Raoul and his parents shared a room in a half-destroyed and abandoned farmhouse with 8 other deportees where they endured unimaginable conditions. As slave laborers, they were forced to dig defensive trenches for the advancing Nazi army and work on a freeway that the Germans were building. After the spring of 1943, Beshad became the command center for the SS Einsatzgruppen D under the command of Otto Ohlendorf. Ohlendorf was later convicted at Nuremberg for the mass murder of over 90,000 Jews. Beshad was liberated by the Red Army in April of 1944 when Raoul was 10 months old. Numerous members of his extended family did not survive, including his great-grandparents. A total of approximately 300,000 Jews perished in Transnistria, but of the 25,000 people imprisoned in Beshad, only 8,000 survived. Transnistria, part of present-day Ukraine, is frequently described as the forgotten Holocaust. Beshad was the largest slave labor concentration camp there. After the Red Army liberated the camp, Rosa, Herman, and Raoul returned to Chernowitz, which then became under communist rule. When the USSR started to exile Jews to Siberia for being, quote, capitalists, his parents escaped to Romania, which shortly thereafter became part of the USSR. 14 years after the end of World War II, Raoul and his parents received asylum in the United States. After residing in New York City for half a year, they emigrated to Israel, where they rebuilt their lives. Raoul's life's journey took him through 5 different countries by the age of 16. He served in the Israeli army, where he met his wife, Michala Artel, and inspired by his mother's difficult pregnancy and delivery, he studied to become a doctor in Israel and Italy, and later specialized in high-risk obstetrics. As Holocaust survivors, his parents spoke often of their wartime experiences, including the atrocities, the beatings, the humiliation, disease, the loss of loved ones, the starvation, all of which they described as unimaginable. Today, Rosa and Herman are buried in the Holon Cemetery in Israel. Raoul and Michael have resided for many years in Los Angeles. They have 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Raoul is a frequent speaker at the Museum of Tolerance, the Holocaust Museum of Los Angeles, and the Simon Wiesenthal Museum. Their youngest daughter, Orna, a former court attorney to Justice Charles Ramos of this court, lights the candle in Raoul's honor and in the memory of her relatives who perished in the Holocaust. Please come up and light the first candle. Thank you. The Lager story, a determination to be free. Erich Lager was born on his father's 40th birthday, July 5, 1932, in Vienna. His father, Israel Mordechai, moved from a town now in present-day Surzhyk, Ukraine, to Vienna when he was 18 and shed his Orthodox upbringing along with his name, which then changed to Julius Marcus Lager. Julius's father, Zvi, owned a lumber yard. Julius respected his father and had a very close relationship with his mother, Anna Rosenberg. During World War I, Julius was drafted into the Austrian army. He was sent to the Russian front as a mounted artillery observer, even though he had never before ridden a horse. As the war neared its end, Julius received a letter informing him that his father was ill. Before dying of cancer, Zvi told Julius that he had served the empire enough. Julius returned to Vienna and worked in the rawhide trade. Once he had saved enough, he went to Lemberg, now known as Lviv, and started his own business. There he married Amalia Himmel, the daughter of a grain importer. Amalia, or Manya as she was known, came from a large and extended family. Julius and Manya settled in Vienna. They enjoyed the theater, concerts, opera, and bridge. Julius played chess and frequently went to coffee houses. They and their daughter Herta and her younger brother Eric lived across from the Prater, a great city park which contained a Ferris wheel. Herta and Eric were happy children and talented artists. But one day, a bullet pierced the front window of the Lager's apartment and precipitated the first of several family moves. In March of 1938, Germany annexed Austria and imposed its anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws on Austria's Jews. The Lager family became endangered. Herta had to leave school. As a Jew, Julius was prohibited from employing Gentiles, although the other Austrian Jews may have thought that if they kept their heads down, Nazism might pass. But for Julius, subjugation was not an option. He made the difficult decision to leave Vienna with his family, and this was really the first of the family's many life-saving choices. Many Viennese Jews were trying to escape Austria, and success may have been a matter of luck. Julius's Austrian supplier, a Christian man, helped him obtain transit papers for his family. Initially, Julius bought passage to Milan, where his cousin, Gerson Rosenberg, lived, only to change her destination to Zurich at the very last minute. Rosenberg, Julius's only surviving cousin, later escaped to Palestine. Despite the help of Zurich's Jewish community, the Lagers could barely afford a tiny apartment or scant food. Their parents sent Herta and Eric to the Swiss countryside to live with families of similar-aged children who needed more help on their farms. Eric was very lonely. He was sent by himself with his destination tag hanging around his neck. Eric enjoyed his time on the first farm, but privately he prayed in his attic bedroom to feel connected again with his family. And when he was almost 7, his family reunited in Zurich and acquired an apartment that felt more like a home. Julius doggedly tried to get his family out of Switzerland. He feared the Germans would invade or that the Swiss would conscript him and put him into forced labor. His family was under great economic stress. After the family heard of a possible sanctuary in Ecuador, they left Switzerland to go to Ecuador from Spain. They traveled through Vichy, France, and then over the Pyrenees Mountains to Spain. The journey was perilous and fraught with potential arrest. After they arrived in Seville, where the boat to Ecuador was to depart, they learned that the boat had left for Cadiz. They followed it, where they spent 2 months languishing in poverty. They then had to return to Seville, where the boat's departure had then been rescheduled. There, on Eric's 9th birthday, the family boarded the Navamar, which was a small cargo freighter designed to carry just 15 passengers. It was converted to carry 1,200 passengers on its penultimate 48-day journey. The Navamar's destination was New York, and most of the refugee passengers aboard had U.S. visas. However, the loggers had planned to travel to Ecuador, which had issued them visas. There was great risk that German submarines would sink the ship. Other passengers described the trip as hell on earth, and the Navarre acquired the name the Floating Concentration Camp. Death and sickness were rampant aboard. After the boat docked in New York, the passengers with U.S. visas disembarked. Public health authorities detained 41 other refugees, including the Lager family on Ellis Island. But somehow, during the 6 weeks on Ellis Island, Julius miraculously obtained permission for the family to remain in the United States. And after their release from Ellis Island, they settled in Manhattan. The Navarre's crew did not fare as well. On the return trip, it was torpedoed, and only one crew member survived. Herta married another survivor, became an art professor. She died in 2021, survived by her children and grandchildren. Eric attended the Music and Art High School, City College, and SUNY Medical School. He became a psychiatrist. He has 2 daughters, a son, and 4 grandchildren. And you can learn more about Eric's odyssey by reading Refugee Years. His daughter, Jonathan Lager, a member of the Jewish Lawyers Guild and sister-in-law of Ronald Katter, the president of the Jewish Lawyers Guild, lights a candle for her parents, for all of the Lagers, for the Himmels and the Rosenbergs who passed in the Holocaust. Please come up and light candle number 2. Thank you. No, thank you for sharing this. Thank you. Please don't thank me when you come up, because and I said this before, thank you for sharing this, for keeping the memory alive with us, for letting us be part of these lives. I appreciate the sentiment, but let me say thank you to the families. Okay, Sam Herskovitz, poor boy turned clever resistor. Sam Yisrael Herskovitz was born on July 2nd, 1927, to parents Ariel Lee and Bela. He grew up on a farm in the rural Jewish community of Rosavella, Romania, with his brothers and sisters Yankel, Rana, Rivka, Roshela, Paragitza, and Mosh. Living on the farm was not easy for Sam. Money was scarce, shoes were a luxury, often leaving him to walk barefoot for miles and miles to get to town. Plum marmalade, a quintessential Romanian comfort, was a rare but treasured treat. After what was come, however, ahead, those hard days on the farm would seem tranquil and easy. In 1940, when he was just 13, the Nazis destroyed his family farm and killed his mother, sisters, and all but one of his brothers. It would be the first of many horrors he had to endure. His father went missing, and Sam, along with his sole surviving brother Yankel, were taken to Bergen-Belsen and later Mittelbau-Dora. Ever the fighter, Sam wished to not just survive the camp, but to fight back. Outright rebellion would have cost him his life, but he was able to resist in secret. And as a short man, or short stature, he was able to crawl into small spaces. So Sam was commanded by the Nazis to construct the inner workings of a V-2 rocket. Using this opportunity, Sam, ever clever and willful, disabled the rocket instead, saving untold lives. Years passed in the camps. Sam would later recollect telling himself, "I must survive another day in order to make it through." Years later, he would still suffer from nightmares of what he saw there. Tragically, just days before liberation, he was briefly reunited with his missing beloved father, but then only found him deceased when he left to get him a glass of water and returned. With nothing left in Europe, Sam emigrated to the United States on a student visa, studying to become a rabbi. Discovering a talent for business and organizing, he began selling textiles in Brooklyn sometime later, and even became a leader in the local textile union. He was very well respected in his community, helping his colleagues navigate labor politics. In 1950, he met the love of his life, Thea, and with her raised 3 children, Lawrence, Jerome, and Belinda. He was no longer just a survivor, but a loving father, able to raise a new generation of Jews after losing so many. Sam Herskovitz passed away on December 15, 2021, leaving behind a legacy as a husband, as a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. Although he is no longer here with us, his stories will resonate with his family and with the Jewish people forever. I'd like to ask Miranda Turkel and her husband, Jewish Lawyers Guild Vice President Avram Turkel, to light a candle for Sam and for all of the Herskowitz family who perished in the Holocaust.
We are honored and privileged to have the Honorable Adam Silvera, recently appointed Administrative Judge of the New York County Supreme Court civil term, who will read the next 3 stories and co-officiate the candlelighting ceremony. Justice Silvera's father is a Holocaust survivor, and it was a privilege to have Mr. Silvera and his family participate in our program several years ago. Justice Silvera is also a good friend and is highly regarded by his colleagues, the members of the bar, and the public for his judicial skill set, even temperament, and engaging personality. My friends, Justice Silvera.
Thank you, Judge Shulman. Good evening, everyone. I will now read the story of the perilous journey of Rose Kfar Rose. Rosalia was born to Esther, Tinka, née Herzer, and Ben-Zion, who was nicknamed Benchik, Kfar in 1927, which was then Lvov, Poland, which is now Lviv, Ukraine. In 1941, Germany occupied the town and instituted anti-Jewish regulations. Rose and her family were moved to the ghetto and forced to wear armbands identifying them as Jews. At age 14, she went to work in a factory. While in the ghetto, she witnessed girls jumping to their death. To avoid arrest, people begging for food, and people shot in the street. Each morning in the ghetto, unidentified dead bodies appeared on the streets. In August of 1942, so many Jews were deported after a morning action that her family took drastic measures to save their lives. Her father purchased false papers for Rosa, and after some convincing, she assumed the identity of a Catholic girl, Janina Gornika. Her parents instructed her to contact their relatives in America if they did not survive. Since she could not carry papers with her, she memorized the address of her great-uncle's furniture store at 24 Avenue B on the Lower East Side in New York. Hiding in plain sight, she went to live with a Polish schoolteacher, Krystyna Moskalik, in a small town near Krakow. Krystyna told everyone that Rosa was the daughter of a cousin, and in the summer of 1942, one of Krystyna's friends learned of Rosa's secret and attempted to blackmail Krystyna. Refusing to be intimidated, Christina reminded the blackmailer that her own husband, a Polish army officer, was in hiding from the Nazis. After that, the fear of discovery was Rosa's constant companion. After Russian liberation in early 1945, Rosa went to Krakow to live with Christina's friends, still living under an assumed name to avoid anti-Semitism. However, she registered with the newly formed Jewish Committee, and a few months later she ran into a family friend who advised her that her mother had escaped the deportation train only to die of typhus in February of 1943. Her father escaped the infamous Janowska camp only to die of typhus in March of 1943. When the Lvov ghetto was liquidated, only her aunt Pola Wasserman and Pola's husband Oskar and aunt Friedke Herzer had survived. Oskar was liberated from Buchenwald and placed a notice in the Yiddish newspaper in New York looking for the brothers of his wife Pola. Rosa's uncle, David Kfar, saw the notice and contacted him in Buchenwald. He told him to look for her near Krakow. The letter they sent Rosa in May of 1945 reached her in August of 1945, and she was overjoyed to learn that family was looking for her. In June of 1945, Friedke Herzer came to Krakow looking for Rosa. Friedke had survived Auschwitz, a slave labor at a munitions factory near Leipzig, and a death march until she was liberated at the Czech border in May of 1945 by the Russians. Sadly, Aunt Pola did not survive. Another uncle, Charles Kfar, who lived on Grand Street in the Lower East Side in New York, sent an affidavit of support to aid Rosa and Friedke's emigration efforts, but the wait list for Polish Jews was long, and Poland refused to let them go until they proved another country would accept them. The U.S. would not issue an immigration visa despite the fact that she was a war orphan and the niece of the affiants. The family turned their attention to Cuba, where a cousin, Raphael Zilber of Havana, arranged for a visa through Paris. With one-way transit out of Poland, she eventually landed in New York on July 30th, 1946. In the immigration waiting room in New York, the young woman with no immediate family met 7 relatives who sneaked in to greet her. After the formalities, she was rushed to Manhattan to see her great-uncle, Sonia Greenstein, who visited Lvov when she was born and waited for her, his only relative to survive the war, before passing away. Her first full day in the U.S. was spent at his funeral, where she grieved not only him, but all she had lost in the Holocaust. She stayed in Havana from September 22, 1946 through January 21, 1948, when she finally entered the United States. Rose, as she was known in America, married Fred Rose, an engineer, and they had one child, Esther. Fulfilling her father's wish that she obtain an education and have a family, Rose earned a PhD and became a professor of chemistry at Kingsborough Community College. Although Rose and Fred have passed, their daughter Esther is with us. Dr. Esther Rose, who is now retired, was the executive director of clinical research at Johnson & Johnson. Dr. Esther Rose and Michael Raskin, a former officer of the Jewish Lawyers Guild and a grandson of Rose's uncle, David Kfar, lights a candle on behalf of Rose, Kfar Rose, and all the Kfars and Herzers who passed in the Holocaust. Please come up. Thank you. Our next story is the story of Silly, Originally born as Celia in 1938 to Yechiel and Sivia Beck, not far from the San River in Leszczyńsk, Poland, now part of the Galicia. The family was adherent to Belzer Chassidut, and after the Nazi invasion in September 1939 and the division of Poland under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Yechiel and Sivia, with Celia in tow, escaped to the Russian side of the San River after the Nazis and local collaborators began rounding up and shooting Jews during the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur holidays. One young teenage cousin was shot dead in the street on Som Gedalia. Silly, as she was called, miraculously survived the war as an infant and young girl because her parents, along with several other relatives, were deported as enemies of the state to Siberia when they refused to accept citizenship in the Soviet puppet republic that was set up in southeastern Poland. The family was packed into cattle cars with other Jews with no food or other provisions and sent on a 3-week train and ferry ride to Siberia. When the train stopped along the way, Yechiel and other Jews would hop off and barter for food needed to survive. Eventually, they ended up in Bodabu, in the middle of Siberia, at about the latitude of Stockholm and the longitude of Hong Kong. From there, they were sent to a labor camp about 60 kilometers up the Vitim River called Sinyuga, part of the Gulag system. Ironically, being sent to a labor camp in Siberia saved most of the family except Silly's grandfather, who died in Siberia. When the Nazis broke their pact with Russia, almost all the Jews left behind in Galicia were murdered. Historians estimate the survival rate among the 150,000 or so Jews who were sent to Siberia at approximately 80%, much better than the 10% survival rate in Poland, if one can make such a gruesome comparison. Deep religious conviction, ingenuity, and hard work allowed Sivia and Yechiel to keep Silly alive in a Siberian labor camp. Ultimately, the Beck family was freed from the labor camp when the Polish government in exile insisted that Polish citizens be freed. Albeit free, they were stuck in Siberia for the duration of the war. Yechiel worked as a laborer, mostly cutting timber in the forest to feed his family. After the war, through a long and arduous journey via Kazakhstan and other countries, the Beck family returned to Poland in 1946, where they and the few other returning Jews found themselves unwelcome. Having experienced communism 6 years, then pogroms in Poland, Yechiel did not want to stay under the Soviet rule or influence. He was able to bribe and smuggle the family into the American sector in Germany. The family briefly lived in DP camps and then took an apartment in Munich. Silly attended the Jewish school in Munich with other children who had somehow survived the war. Her younger brother and sister were born in Munich. In 1951, the family was able to emigrate to the US when Silly was nearly 13. Even though the family was Hasidic, Silly was placed in the modern Orthodox yeshiva of Flatbush High School, eventually graduating near the top of her class. She went on to Barnard, where she was a contemporary of Chief Judge Judith Kaye and of Justice Miriam Altman of blessed memory, and may their memories be a blessing for all. Silly met Sidney Kaufman when his best friend was dating one of her friends. Sidney, a lawyer born in the Bronx to immigrants from present-day Ukraine and Belarus, was not a survivor, but had lost paternal relatives to the Holocaust, including a grandmother, aunt with 4 young children, and an aunt with 4 young children. He and his sister regularly slept on a fire escape so that war refugees from the family's hometown could shelter in his parents' tiny apartment while getting settled in the United States. Silly and Sidney had two sons, Benjamin, an accomplished lawyer, and Dan, an engineer and an anesthesiologist. They later separated, but shortly afterwards, Silly made Aliyah in 1984, joining her parents and siblings who had moved to Israel more than a decade earlier. She lived in Israel until her death in 2013 from complications after breast cancer surgery. After moving to Israel, she only returned to the United States once in 1992 for her son Ben's wedding. Silly is survived by her son Benjamin Kaufman, an officer of the Jewish Lawyers Guild, his wife Linda, and their sons Jordan, Sammy, and Alex, and Dr. Dan Kaufman, his wife Barbara, and their sons Asher, Zach, and Avery, and daughter Gloria. We welcome Benjamin Kaufman to come up and light a candle in honor of his mother. Thank you. Our next story is the story of Betya and Michael Chachko, a Ukrainian love story. Betya was the youngest of three children born to Liba and Moshe Goldenberg on January 16, 1929, in Balta, Ukraine. In 1941, when Betya's family was evacuated from Balta to Tashkent, their oldest daughter, Ella, who was a 20-year-old medical student, died of pneumonia. Isaac, Betya's brother, known by his family as Isa, and their father, Moshe, both fought in the Russian army, as most men of fighting age felt was their duty. The remaining Goldenbergs were able to move to Odessa from Tashkent in 1945. Michael Chachko was born to Fanya and Gavril on September 1st, 1926, in Odessa, Ukraine. He had one older sister, Nina, with whom he was incredibly close. Michael's father grew up in Proskurov in a wealthy family and had been educated in Paris. His maternal grandfather was a well-respected rabbi and merchant. Fanya and Gavril had a wealthy and influential family, which did not help them one iota when Hitler's men came to their doorstep. The war started when Michael was 14 years old. His mother told him he had to go fight for his country. Michael, barely a child, was resistant, but he was given no choice by his mother, Fanya, a very strong-willed woman, found a flight school for Michael where he could study to become a pilot in the Russian army. Ultimately, it was his mother's strong will that saved his life. Michael returned home to Odessa after the war to an empty house. His neighbors told him that they had seen his parents and sister Nina taken from their home by the Nazis in 1942 or 1943 to a place where Jews were shot. Michael held out hope that his sister Nina was still alive because he knew that most older Jews were killed, but sometimes younger Jews were kept alive. He was always looking for Nina, but sadly never found her. As Michael searched for aunts and uncles, hoping for any surviving relatives, he discovered from the neighbors of one of his aunts that though she had been taken out and shot, she had been able to hide her 6-month-old identical twins, Zhenya and Mycia, under the bed. As soon as 2 of her neighbors felt that it was safe, they went to retrieve the twins, and the twin sisters were raised separately by loving mothers and were eventually reunited 4 to 5 years later. Michael found his first cousins and continued to cherish his relationship with them throughout the rest of his life. Michael did not have much family left, but when he met the beautiful Betya at a dance, he knew that they were destined to build a new family together. They married on May 8, 1948, on the 3rd-year anniversary of VE Day. In the beautiful progressive city of Odessa on the Black Sea coast, they aspired, as so many did in the Ukraine, to live freely like those in the West. This had been the desire of the people in Ukraine even before the war. Although Betya's parents both survived the war, it took a great toll on their health. Moish passed in 1961, and Liba passed in 1965 from heart failure and other ailments that followed years of malnourishment and great stress. Michael and Betcha had two daughters, Faina and Ella. Faina, 10 years Ella Sr., married and had a daughter, Luba, while still in Odessa. In 1979, Betcha, Michael, Faina, her husband Ilya, Luba, and Ella all left Odessa for New York. Unfortunately, Odessa, the city that they had loved, did not love the Jews back. Ella met her husband, Mel Gerzes, who was also the son of Holocaust survivors. Ella and Mel married in 1981 and had two children, Lee and Alyssa. Alyssa's middle name is Nina, after Michael's beloved older sister. Before Betcha passed at age 92, she became a great-grandmother to Lee's two beautiful children, Matthew and Maya. Betcha and Michael, who became known as Mickey after baby Lee pointed out his rather large ears, loved their family with the greatest ferocity. Despite all their devastating losses and hardships, they persisted through life with love and generosity. As an attorney in New York, one of Alyssa's most important goals is to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten or repeated. Attorney Gerzes is a board member and director of programming at the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists and the vice president of finance of the Jewish Lawyers Guild. She lights these candles in loving memory of Mickey, Betcha, their parents and siblings, and for all the Ukrainian Jews who continue their fight for freedom. Thank you.
Please rise for the El Maleh Memorial Prayer.
Lord.
Thank you. Please be seated. Before we present our keynote speaker's video presentation, I just want to take a moment or two to join Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Debbie Kaplan in publicly expressing our thanks and appreciation to a number of individuals who made this afternoon's program possible. First, thank you to our outstanding president of the Jewish Lawyers Guild, Ronald Katter, who actively promoted our program and assisted our program committee. My program co-chair, Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Kaplan, and Administrative Judge Adam Severa for their assistance and moving readings. Our program committee members, Acting Supreme Court Justice Lisa Sokoloff, Principal Court Attorney Joan Levinson, and Jewish Lawyers Guild Vice President of Finance and Litigation Attorney Alyssa Gresh, for their active involvement with every facet of our program. Greg Testa of the Supreme Court Law Department and co-chair of the Gender Fairness Committee, Dennis Rio, Chief Clerk of the New York County Supreme Court, the indefatigable and amazing Michelle Gazieski of the New York County Supreme Court Administrative Officers and her team, Louis Carrero, Augustine Capote, Ahmad Jenkins, Sergio Colon, and the Office of Court Administration's IT team, Rob Apicella, Martin Hahn, Nick Inverso, and Tom Laughlin, and of course, County Clerk Richie Beresfo and his team. I must also publicly acknowledge the invaluable assistance of Melinda Mullen, Senior Director of Publicity for Harper One and imprint of HarperCollins, publishers of Lily's Promise, the survivor autobiography of Mrs. Lily Ebert, for facilitating our keynote video presentation from London, England. Finally, enhancing our program every year is a uniquely created exhibit this year titled Everlasting Links, on loan from the renowned Ahmad Eish Memorial Museum, which is being displayed in our rotunda during our annual Holocaust Remembrance Week. Thank you, Rabbi Shalom Friedman, AAMM's Director and Chief Executive Officer, and Ellie Kleiman, who is with us today, founder and president, and their staff for sharing these historic artifacts of cultural resilience and your work with us. It is a profound honor and privilege to present our keynote speaker, Mrs. Lily Ebert, 98 years young, Holocaust survivor who was joined by her great-grandson, Dov Foreman, who assisted her in authoring her world-acclaimed autobiography, Lily's Promise. I am sure all of you will be moved as I was by this video presentation.
This is my great-grandmother Lily.
Shabbat Shalom.
We all call her Safta, which means grandmother in Hebrew. When she was 20, Safta and her family were taken from their home in Hungary to Auschwitz. What she lived through is unimaginable. But my great-grandmother Lily is a survivor. She made a promise to herself that if she got out, she would share her story with the world so that they would never forget. I grew up knowing that Safta was a survivor, and I've always had lots of questions for her. I'm almost as old now as Lily was when she was taken to Auschwitz, and unfortunately, we still see a lot of the same hatred in the world that she saw in the days of the Holocaust. Now I'm helping Lily to keep her promise. Together, we are sharing her story with a new generation, so that we never forget. This book is her story. This is Lily's promise. My name is Dov Foreman. It is such an honour to have been invited, together with my great-grandmother Lily Ebert, by the Jewish Lawyers Guild of New York, to be the keynote speakers at this year's annual Holocaust Remembrance programme. Being a member of what is now known as the fourth generation is a huge part of my identity. In recent years, I've had the immense privilege of speaking alongside my incredible great-grandmother about her harrowing Holocaust testimony, and I know that she is nothing short of remarkable. I still find it hard to comprehend all that she went through during the Holocaust, and the courage and determination that she has shown throughout her life. Now I work with my great-grandmother to educate others about the horrors of the Holocaust. We tell people across the world about Lily's happy childhood, her wonderful parents and siblings, and how it's all changed when the Nazis occupied Hungary in March 1944. We tell people about Auschwitz-Birkenau, slave labour and concentration camps. We tell people about how entire communities were destroyed. We tell people that my great-grandmother was lucky that some of her family survived, because in other places, no one was left to mourn or remember. We tell people about how my great-grandmother rebuilt her life, and we tell people about how proud she is of her large and loving family now, with recently now 36 great-grandchildren. We try to educate people all the time. We currently have just over 1.9 million followers on TikTok, and we use social media to teach the next generation, my generation. In 2020, my great-grandmother and I wrote our best-selling and award-winning book, Lily's Promise, which is being published by HarperCollins, Harper One, an imprint of HarperCollins, in the US on May 10th next week, so that even more people across the world could read and learn from Lily's story and learn the lessons from the Holocaust. We were especially honoured that His Royal Highness Prince Charles wrote the foreword to Lily's Promise. He writes movingly about the need to transform history to memory. He says, "For the Jewish people, the Holocaust was a personal tragedy. By the end of the Second World War, 2/3 of European Jewry had perished at the hands of the Nazis. 6 million innocent Jewish men, women and children murdered for no reason other than the religion they were born into. A great pillar of smoke covered all of Europe, the shadow of which remains still with us today. Yet the Holocaust was also a universal human tragedy. It was the greatest crime of man against man, during which humanity showed itself capable of incomprehensible crimes on an incomprehensible scale. Names were replaced with numbers, tattooed on forearms, as a permanent reminder of the depths to which humankind can sink and the evil it can impart on a fellow human being. The Holocaust is a unique and dark period in human history, but its lessons are universal. We must remember, and we must always speak out. We must always take a stand against injustice and intolerance and indifference wherever we see it in society. If we don't keep remembering the past, and if we don't keep speaking out, we can never ever change the future. Working with my incredible great-grandmother over the past few years has been so special, and I've learned more about her and her incredible story than I ever knew before. She is a true inspiration. Last week, Jewish and non-Jewish people across the world came together to mark Yom HaShoah, the Jewish Holocaust Remembrance Day. Each year on Yom HaShoah, people come together to remember the victims of the Holocaust. It is now more important than ever that we listen to the incredible survivors like my great-grandmother. We must remember their stories, and we must take the time to remember those who are no longer able to speak for themselves. My great-grandmother knew that if she survived Auschwitz, she would be called on one day in her future to become a witness. And I know that one day in my future, when the incredible survivors are no longer with us, that I will be called on to become their witness. I will be their witness to the next generation. And today, as you listen to my great-grandmother who is about to share her story, we are inviting you to become her witness, to ensure that these important stories are never forgotten. By creating a space where people can listen to the survivors, we hope to combat anti-Semitism, but also encourage social action, recommitting ourselves to the belief set out in the Jewish law of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. I'm now privileged to invite my great-grandmother to share some of her incredibly harrowing Holocaust testimony with you.
My name is Lily Ebert. I am a Holocaust survivor. I want to tell you about my story, because in a few years' time, I won't be able to. it will become a history. I was born in Hungary, the oldest of 6 children. When the Nazis occupied Hungary, we had to give up everything. My brother knew that the things will get worse, so he put a few jewelry for my mother, including my golden pendant in the heel of my mother's shoe. When I was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, along with my mother, with my younger brother, and 3 of my sisters, we traveled in cattle trucks. And the conditions were unbelievable. Quite a few people died on the way. As we traveled, my mother said maybe we should swap shoes. And we did. After 5 days, we arrived to Auschwitz-Birkenau. My mother, my younger sister and brother were sent straight to the gas chamber, crematorium. I never saw them again. I still find hard to talk about Auschwitz. How do you describe a factory of death? How? A place of industrial killing. The Nazis shaved our heads and took away our clothing. By chance, I was able just to keep my shoes. When the heel of my shoe wore out, I moved the jewelry and kept it safe by hiding it in my little piece of bread. It survived along with me, and the only thing what I have today for my childhood. I wear it every day. After Auschwitz, I was sent with my sisters to slave labor to the Nazis. And I was eventually liberated by the Allied forces in 1945. I looked after my 2 sisters and kept them safe with me. After liberation, we moved to Israel, and there we built our new lives. Later, I came to the UK. Hundreds of members of my extended family were murdered during the Holocaust. I am telling you what took place there because they cannot. And in few years' time, it will be nobody here to tell our story. I promised myself, if I survive against all the odds, I will do all I can to share my story for myself and for those who haven't survived. And I am too. I am a witness. I speak to different communities what happened there. But I know there will come a time when I can't do anymore. I am so happy that I have been able to share my story with young people like all of you here today. You will continue to share my story when I cannot anymore. Because I want that the world should never forget the most terrible crime against humanity. I am pleased to be standing here today and to know that my story is being recognized and heard. My story and surviving the Holocaust, Auschwitz, is not the topical story of the Holocaust. The typical story, if the Holocaust not told, because the typical story involves the murder, the entry, villages, communities, and families by gun, gas, and starvation. I ask today become my witness on to realize that just someone becomes some different than you are is not better or worse than you. It is only different. And we must obey that. We must realize that we humans are most the same. Our blood is red. And when they hurt us, it hurts. Now, I want to tell a huge thanks to you all for listening, and when I cannot anymore, you will be my witness and telling my story. Thanks.
We conclude our Holocaust Remembrance program presenting the SAR Choir under the leadership of Rabbi Kenneth Birnbaum. The SAR Choir is an SAR High School's premier singing ensemble. Students rehearse weekly to prepare material for in-school and out-of-school performances. Students sing a diverse repertoire of traditional and contemporary music, both accompanied and a cappella. My friend, the talented SAR Choir.
I was made way back in 1842 by a humble man, a real God-fearing Jew, who did his work with honesty, feeling, and with pride. He was known in Kiev as Yankele the scribe. With love and care, his hands so sure and still, he formed me with some parchment, ink, and quill. Each day he'd slowly add to me just a few more lines, words to last till the end of time. As the rabbi pulled me close against his chest, oh, they said, carried me, I would stay. As Rabbi held me close against his chest, he spoke out loud and clear to all the rest. He said, no matter if you're very young or even if you're old, live by the words you'll find inside the scroll. 3 days a week they read from me out loud. It filled my soul with joy, it made me proud. They followed each and every verse with fire in their eyes, words that taught them how to live their lives. I watched the generations come and go. I saw the old men die, their children grow. But never in a century did I miss my turn once, for the fathers they had left me with their sons. But the hatred from the west came to Kiev, and they rounded up the Jews who had not fled. But Moshe the Shamus, he was brave and he was bold, and he hid me in a cellar, dark and cold. And for years and years I waited all alone for the people of my town to take me home. And they'd sing and dance and hold me high when they carried me away to the little wooden shul where I would stay. But it's someone else who finds my hiding place. And to America they shipped me in a crate. And the men who took me off the boat said I was a prize, but they were Jews I did not recognize.
הרחמים, הוא ירחם בממוסים ויזכור ברית נתנים. הרחמים, הוא ירחם הממוסים ויזכור ברית נתנים.
Thank you, SAR Choir and Rabbi Birnbaum. That concludes our program. Please take a moment and look at our beautiful exhibit that we have from Amud Eish. Get home safely.